What is up, everybody? Welcome to my review and breakdown for Superman and Lois Season 3, Episode 4, and we had quite a few good moments this episode. We had Clark Kent doing something that wasn't a job for Superman, but possibly gave us the coolest Clark Kent scene we've had in this show so far. We've had some more Bruno Mannheim stuff with that slowly building in the background. We got some more development towards Superboy and all kinds of other things. So I thought that this was a pretty cool episode. Let's go through the events of it. Of course, as usual, let me know your own thoughts, your own theories and opinions on this episode and what could be happening in the future down in that comment section. And if you go on to enjoy it, I'd really appreciate a like, or if you dislike it, dislike it. But I'd appreciate a like if you tune into these videos every week. So the beginning of the episode was great. I really enjoyed seeing Superman sweep in with this big forest fire, stopping an RV getting completely flattened by a tree. But then we saw Superboy in the background and Clark had to fly off, but it was quite cool how he left the responsibility to Jordan to like work around the perimeter with his cold breath and then make his way in. But it turns out that Superman rushed home after hearing, I guess that alarm sound isn't always a sound when the actual Superman alarm rings. It turns out he's just always got his ear senses dialed up, way up, for whenever there's something going on with Lois. So she just dropped a glass, it smashed, and then he thought she could be in danger, so he had to get out of there. And Lois didn't really appreciate that snooping. But already, just with this intro to the episode, it somewhat foreshadows even more teamwork with father and son, Superman and Super Son, if you will, Superboy. And we get a little bit of a development on that later on with Sam Lane, and I'll save that for a bit later. But then we have Jordan and Jonathan yelling at each other. Clark is getting pretty angry at this because he wants everything to be as smooth for Lois as possibly can be because she had her first chemo session the day before, and all of this in the background is just, it's not really considerate when you're trying to lower the stress levels of Lois, even though at the same time Lois doesn't want everyone to hover around her. She doesn't want to be made to feel fragile, like, you know, yes, she has got cancer, but that doesn't define her. This episode for Lois was really kind of meant to be a rest day, but with how, you know, chaotic things are and what's going on around them with John Henry Irons, the boys, the Jonathan storyline and what happened there, it didn't really seem like she had much of a break. So this is when we jump onto John Henry Irons' storyline this episode, and we first saw him looking at the kryptonite plasma propulsion gauntlets, I believe they were. And what was cool about this storyline is that they implemented that these were designed by his doppelganger self on this Earth. Like he recognized, oh, but this is a little bit similar to, like, I guess the propulsion on my steel suit. So he goes to visit Clark and somewhat talk to him about this, but then he finds out that they kind of already know about this stuff. This all develops up into a point of where Clark pretends to race off getting gummy worms and popcorn, and then they talk about it a bit further, and John Henry Irons comes up with the idea of, ultimately, if I'm to find out more about this, I need to go see Darlene myself. And I was thinking, oh man, well, this is definitely gotta give her a shot. But meanwhile, let's talk about Jonathan. He decides to go to Candice's place and her dad answers the door. This starts a whole storyline this episode that resulted in an amazing moment. But initially, we have Candice's dad acting like creepy Candice's dad, saying, oh, you got to spread lies about me, Johnny boy, and all that stuff. Jonathan confronted him about stealing his car and everything. It got up until the point of where he called him a bad dad. Jonathan got smacked in the face. And of course, when Jonathan gets home, nothing gets past Lois, and she realizes that he has a black eye the size of frickin' Australia. So while that was going on with Jonathan, with Jordan, we had him in the car with Sam Lane, and he basically informed him, like, yeah, look at this D.O.D footage. I know we can't technically see your face, but if we want to keep your identity secret, you having massive curly hair at least gives it a bit more of a description, so let's get your hair cut. And I have to admit, I did find what Sam Lane said and the jokes he was cracking about Jordan's hair was pretty funny, but this turned a little bit sour because we had Jordan storm off while insulting General Lane, saying you wouldn't know what it's like to be a hero. He didn't exactly say that, but that was, you know, the disrespect that he showed him, considering that he's a 4-star general. Now, this storyline didn't really continue until towards the end of the episode, but I do remember reading that we were going to get some Superboy / Jordan stuff with Papa Lane, you know, Grandpapa Lane this this season, so I wonder if they're going to cook that along a lot further than just be on the suit, but we'll save that for a little bit later. But of course, we have Clark and Lois now talk to Jonathan. Now, Clark in this moment has to race off to the D.O.D, so he doesn't hear the full extent of things going down, but Lois hears about how his truck got stolen, the whole story about how they raced in there in that cool scene with Natalie and how Jonathan just had to hold his breath and make his way through to the truck. But Lois finds out who it was that caused all of this, and it was Candice's dad. So she went into full mama bear mode, and she went over there, confronted him. He's just denying it, saying, I don't know what stories your son may have told you and all that stuff. And essentially he flexes a pistol, and Lois is completely fearless in this moment, isn't remotely afraid of him. And this was just an enjoyable scene. Obviously, I felt bad for her because, especially with the way the episode started off, Clark is really trying to look after her, make everything, just defuse anything and everything he possibly can for her. But she's now getting to the point of having to, march up to Candice's dad. And now there's almost like a gun being flexed in her face. So it's not exactly the day she had planned. So as a result of that, when she gets back, especially with how utterly exhausted you'd be going through chemo alone, she collapses to the floor, like just through, I suppose, the stress of all of it, how weak she'd probably be anyway as a result of this. So again, this is something that reminds me, like, what are things going to be like in 5-6 episodes time with regards to how much weaker Lois could get and how severe things could get anyway. Like, I'm genuinely intrigued. Like, one part of me is just like, well, they're not going to do anything too severe with Lois, and that I assume it's going to be a storyline where there might be a few scary moments where they might say it's got even more aggressive, but through perseverance, resilience, she eventually enters recovery. This is a fight that, of course, Lois has to do herself. I've seen some people mention in previous review videos of mine, the comment section, say, out of thousands of years of tech or Kryptonian heritage and stuff, they don't have anything. The whole reason as to why they don't want to do that is because it would be even more of a piss take, to be honest. I get what people are saying there, but if they just tackled the issue of Lois Lane's cancer, where it's just like, Kryptonian perks, boom, like I'm cured now. Do you know what I mean? It would just completely devalue the really big importance of a storyline like this if you could kind of click your fingers, go to the Fortress of Solitude, and resolve something as serious as this. As quick as that. Meanwhile, with Clark having raced to the D.O.D as Superman, he hears from General Lane that they were looking into how his blood got taken by Bruno Mannheim, and it was kind of exactly what I thought would be last episode. There must have been a time in the past where they took his blood, and it turned out it was with Ali Alston, and they saved some just in case something like this could ever happen again, maybe a blood transfusion when he's very weak, so they could actually maybe give him one, and they swear that they did nothing else with his blood, and she's like, I swear on God, but it does kind of make you think, but I was also thinking, maybe a bit nitpicky for some, like, surely General Lane should have been aware about this. Maybe it's something that flew under the radar that they did just anyway as a protocol or something, just in case Superman did get hurt again, but it was a surprise to him, which I found a bit strange. They're also confused because every single vial of blood is accounted for, which means that they must have synthesized this Superman blood with just one drop, so that's why all the vials are still there. They only needed one drop to recreate Superman's blood, which also means that someone must have taken a drop from the D.O.D. I don't know if they're gonna make a big deal out of who this kind of infiltrator was in the D.O.D, or just put it down to like, one of Bruno Mannheim's men or himself got through to someone at the D.O.D and just required one drop and probably extorted them, threatened their family. I really don't know, but probably something like that. Clark makes sure that there's absolutely no blood behind by heat visioning the living crap out of it. Back with John Henry Irons, he stops his sister in public. Like, she could have completely freaked out. He says that he's not her brother, and there is a bit of like a understandable reaction here from her, I suppose, because the world was exposed to the bizarro Earth, so she's like, oh, like that thing, like you're from somewhere like that, and he's like, yeah, something like that. So she can kind of understand how there is a doppelganger of her brother. She briefly goes over the history of her version of John Henry Irons, that when, he got out the service, he got distant, even paranoid, and then he was selling military weapons on the side, and then 6 months later, he was murdered. Now, this is when a car pulls up, and it turns out that Bruno Mannheim wants a word with this version of John Henry Irons, because it's blatantly obvious that, the doppelganger of John Henry on this Earth got wound up with him and ended up dying. And I've got a couple of theories as to how things could have gone down, especially with the dialogue from Bruno Mannheim, but we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. So meanwhile, with the Cushing family this episode, of course, we have the continuation of the storyline from last week, where we had Sarah and Lana get into like a very heated argument, which resulted in Lana slapping Sarah, and she's now been staying at Kyle's. Kyle didn't quite realize the extent of how bad things got, so he said that he's going to make sure that never happens again. But when he sees Lana, he didn't quite realize that Sarah, in the middle of that argument, weaponized his affair and says that Lana was to blame for why Kyle cheated on her, which obviously, as I said in my last week's review, both parties in that argument were pretty damn wrong. Sarah was being very, very disrespectful, and Lana was going pretty damn ham and did something to the point of where, as per what this show is highlighting itself, because I replied to a couple of comments in my last week's review, everyone kind of has different opinions on this, but what the show is highlighting is that obviously there's faults on both sides, but the character herself of Lana, despite doing what she did to Sarah, feels absolutely mortified through her actions, and even said that she lost control and that there is no excuse. Bottom line with this story, it's just kind of about reconciling with what happened on both sides. Lana promises that what happened at the end of last week's episode will never happen again, and as she's so disappointed in herself, and Sarah says that obviously she didn't mean to weaponize the affair. So once again, with the Cushing family, even though, as per what a lot of people say, more Cushing drama, it does ground this show in other areas and offers quite a realistic lens on what many people experience. Without repeating myself so much from last review, whether that's Lana and Kyle's divorce and how people can relate to that, the family drama, the Sarah and Lana stuff, it just essentially shines a lens on what people can relate to outside of that, of the super family, if you will. It's just, I think the bottom line will always be, is are people invested in these characters enough? And I find that most people say that it's just, I don't really care about Kyle, I don't really care about Lana, I don't really care about Sarah. I do enjoy these characters, but I can see why, since they're not absolutely integral always to every, main plot thing, that people just kind of see them as like, oh, here's another Cushing thing. So let me know what you think there with regards to, are you actually invested in these characters 3 seasons in? So this is where we get the fantastic ramp up to the episode. As with what I usually say with Superman and Lois, they try and reserve these scenes, so when like Clark goes to the diner, for example, or the John Henry Irons, Bruno Mannheim stuff, they kind of couple them together and swap between them to make a really climactic point of certain episodes. So here we have Clark race home from the D.O.D. and he finds out that Candice's dad hit Jonathan and stole the truck. Now, what I enjoyed about these following moments is that, as Lois said, isn't a job for Superman. He's like, I know. This showcased Clark resolving a problem, not in Superman mode, and we don't always get that, if you know what I mean. And I think on paper, to people, it wouldn't always sound so interesting. I think they would always kind of veto it for like, oh no, I want another Superman moment. So selling that here and executing it in a way that makes Clark Kent arguably just as entertaining in a scene as if we traded this for a Superman moment is what made this so cool to me. So he went in there and he tried to take it outside, and Candice's dad was, well, acting like Candice's dad. I love how firm Clark was being in this moment. I think Tyler Hoechlin did an impeccable job. It's like, you hit my son, pulled a gun on my wife, and now you and I are going to step outside so we can talk. And then he just gets up, tries to push Clark. Clark doesn't even so much as flinch. I loved everyone's reactions in the diner, like Carl initially getting up and then just kind of sitting down and just like, oh, damn. And it's just like, if only you knew who you were speaking to. But again, that kind of misses the point of this of this scene. This was definitely a Clark Kent scene that knocked it out the park. And this may sound crazy to some of you, but I would say this puts it on the level of a Superman scene that I think most people would choose to see over something like this, again, if it was pitched on paper. But yeah, what more can I say than that was awesome, and I would love to know your own reactions to this. Back with John Henry Irons now, he meets with Bruno Mannheim, and we start to see how annoyed Bruno Mannheim is getting with Lois Lane. He says that years and years, Lois has been coming after him, convinced that he took over as leader of Intergang, in where he name-dropped Boss Moxie, which was pretty cool, because he was the founder of Intergang, and actually, in the source material, Boss Moxie is Bruno Mannheim's father, and Bruno did take over after Boss Moxie died. But again, adaptations aren't copy and paste, as I always say, so they're probably doing something different here, unless they do a twist in where this actually is the case. He goes on to say that she even sends Superman, and then shows some pictures of John Henry in a steel suit with Superman. So he says that makes sense to him, because John Henry's doppelganger on this earth always wanted to be a hero, make a difference in the world, and he was one of the smartest men that he ever met, but he just wouldn't listen, which is when it was revealed after he was flicking through the photos. The last photo was of John Henry's doppelganger's sister, basically strapped up to a bomb. Now, as I said earlier with the theories, it makes me think that the John Henry Irons on this earth, initially when we first heard about him and Intergang, we might have thought that he was actually bad, but now I'm starting to think, especially after Manheim said that the John Henry Irons that he knew always wanted to be a hero, make a difference in the world, one of the smartest men, but he just wouldn't listen, that maybe he strong-armed him, excuse me, losing my voice, into making weapons for him, this, that, and the other. He wouldn't listen, so he ended up getting killed. So maybe he isn't as bad as the way we initially, saw the connections with Intergang, and that he actually ended up losing his life over it. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's a development in the storyline later on where our John Henry Irons reveals to the doppelganger's sister, Darlene, that her brother actually was maybe doing the right thing and died doing the right thing. I could be wrong about that, but I think that's roughly where it's going. Especially when you take into account the other dialogue where he says to walk away to John Henry Irons, don't make the same mistake he did, inferring that this Earth's John Henry Irons didn't walk away and tried to stop Mannheim potentially. So either way, this introduced a really cool moment in where John Henry runs out, there's a suit transformation scene, he tries to find Darlene, and he does find her. There's only like 30 seconds left, and the cool thing about this is that obviously this is tech designed by his doppelganger, so he manages to defuse it just in the nick of time. I know lots of people have also been pointing out in the previous episodes, I've noticed it as well, I just haven't really spoken about it, but in this episode again, you could see the LexCorp tower all lit up with the giant L, so more foreshadowing for the Lex Luthor coming this season. He is coming, if you didn't know already. Some people were saying, oh, that's a spoiler, how dare you spoil it? Like, the CW have been heavily entertaining Lex Luthor coming to this season, or should I say advertising. Like, it shouldn't really be a surprise. But what I'm intrigued with is, when is he showing up, and how is he truly involved in all of this? We have John Henry Irons race back, grab Bruno Mannheim by the throat, but Bruno Mannheim reveals that he's got tabs on all of his family, all the way in New Orleans as well. So if anything happened to him, they obviously are in extreme danger. But over the next couple of weeks, he's got to set up security, just like he did in Lana's house, before they go after him again. So, hopefully that will be, okay. But meanwhile, at the Kent home, Candice gets offered to stay there. I wonder if this is going to make things harder for them to do super things, or is she eventually going to find out? I don't know. Lois tells Jordan off for disrespecting Grandpapa Lane, so they get a scene in where he gives Jordan a Superboy suit. We don't really see too much of this suit other than it's got like an empty kind of, Kryptonian crest there, like no details, but a space for it. He's given, like, I believe his father's or grandfather's goggles, I can't remember, but either way, we can see that there's a hood attached to it as well. We'll see this in future episodes, I'm sure, but for now, we don't really get a great look, but it's cool that we're taking more and more and more and more steps towards Jordan becoming a public superhero. I mean, I don't think we're going to get that right now, but I wouldn't be surprised at some point this season, like, he lands in public and everyone's kind of looking at him, and then he like flies away and there's newspapers in Metropolis about this sighting of potentially another Kryptonian. But then the end of the episode, we have Lois cook up a plan about setting up her chemo treatment at a hospital controlled by Mannheim, so they can, learn a little bit more about what's going on there. And then the end of the episode cuts to Bruno once again really annoyed about Lois Lane, digging like a dog with a bone, as he described earlier, and sees that she signed up for his hospital. And it basically ends off with him saying, for now, we need to know what she wants. So that was basically the episode, and I thought it was an all-round very, very enjoyable episode. Lots of great moments in it, some really cool confrontational scenes with Lois and then Clark. I didn't realize that they both had confrontational scenes with other people, well, the same person rather. We delved further into John Henry Irons' connection, or the doppelganger's connection with Bruno Mannheim. The Superboy stuff is cooking along slowly but surely and nicely. I just enjoyed it, so I'd love to know what you guys think, and any theories that you have going into future episodes. Let me know those down in the comments below. And as usual, I'm just going to ask you guys, especially if you made it to this point, leave a like on it. It really helped me out in the algorithm, get some more people into these reviews. Do subscribe if you've actually found yourself brand new here, if you want weekly breakdowns of Superman and Lois and news reviews in other areas of all this kind of stuff. But for now, guys, just thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you fellow Kryptonians in the next video. Goodbye.